Hey reader, this is Centaur here, and we are continuing in our transport series today, looking at our fourth approach and theory for how to use transports, and this is the gun truck approach. Now, as I mentioned in the last one, we're starting to move into the more niche uses for transports and ability to move men up, but these are getting into kind of weirder ground because it's not how you might immediately think about a transport as regards your philosophy and your theory, and you might be leaning toward taking something else to fill that same role. But this is one of the things that some transports in the game can do. And so because of that, we want to cover it here. And this approach is what we call the gun truck approach. So, in terms of where we're at, this is a nice midway point because we are still physically transporting men with transports, but all of the others still do involve moving men up. It's just that they won't be involving actual transports moving men on their own. So, what do we mean by the gun truck theory or approach to transports? This is where we're still buying transport units, and the intention is to have the ability to transport them if we want to. But the most important thing about the transport is that it has a gun, just straight up. And what we're actually taking this for is we want something with the men that we're transporting up that can give supporting and suppressing fire to the enemy, supporting fire to our troops to make sure that they get where they need to go, and possibly giving them some level of cover along the way. But in reality, what we really want is a firing lane to make it so that enemies who would be attacking us cannot do so. Very commonly, you will see armored transports like the M3 White Scout car that's over there on the right-hand side. You will also see very cheap trucks going with a simple light truck, commonly taken regular, possibly inexperienced if you're just looking for pin generation, and then you slap a 15-point forward-facing machine gun on it. And if it happens to carry troops, great. If it doesn't happen to carry troops, fine too. It's doing its job, which is to provide supporting fire down the range toward the enemy that might try to attack you. So in reality, what you're buying here is you're really buying a machine gun team or a heavy machine gun team on wheels slash treads. Now, this also means you're getting halved shots in third edition. So it works a little bit differently than how it did in second edition, where you're still getting the same number of shots as you would for the normal weapon system. It's just that you could move and shoot in the same turn. This also means that there's kind of a symbiotic relationship that's going on. Infantry are being are able to screen for the transport. They're able to engage and shoot at enemies like, say, bazooka teams or some sort of anti-tank team that would be a potential threat to the vehicle. And then meanwhile, the transport is giving cover fire for the infantry. It's providing suppression downrange at things that would try to remove your infantry section that's walking along with it. So in this case, for example, with the example you see on the right, you've got an officer who's inside of the M3 White Scout car just to help keep him safe. He's safer from rifle fire and snipers and stuff like that. He's providing morale bubble very usefully right around everything. It's an open top transport, so he's even able to help the infantry that's behind him. The transport is giving cover fire for the infantry, and the infantry are able to shoot around the scout car on account of the fact that they can't technically damage it, so they're allowed to shoot within an inch of it, right? And so they're able to symbiotically help each other. Everybody's playing a role, everybody is being useful toward the end goal, which is suppress the enemy so that by the time we get there, we're able to take the objective. So what are the advantages of the gun truck theory? Well, it's instead of putting your eggs in specific baskets and worrying about it, you have your eggs kind of near the basket for protection and for potential mobility. Okay, and we'll get into the psychological impact when we talk about the tactics of this and why this is such a useful way to use transports. Okay. The vehicle also then pins would-be attackers to both itself and the infantry. And this helps to provide protection, and it can move up with the infantry in ways that a machine gun team of various kinds cannot do. And to some extent, because of the fact that you could run an infantry section and then advance the vehicle at basically the same rate, if not the same rate, if not a better rate, it even makes it better than using a dedicated, other infantry section with, say, a light machine gun or multiple light machine guns in it. It makes it more effective because you can actually keep pace, right? Instead of consistently falling behind where the rest of your men are. It does mean that you are susceptible to ambush still, as one can imagine. But unlike just taking a transport to move men up, you maximize your advance orders, right? So if you needed to put the guys inside of the transport would be able to move and not just move with the ability to drop men off, it can move and shoot while still maintaining the ability to drop men off, right? And so while yes, you can technically save points by not buying the machine gun, the incentive here is that because we know we're going to be taking advance actions in order to drop men off and provide that quick, flexible relocation of troops for deep strike capability, we want to take advantage of the shoot aspect of advance and not just treat it as half a run. These also can be really cheap, right? So, like if you buy a light truck, you purchase it veteran with the machine gun on it, it's only running you 38 points. It's really not that much. And that still gives you transport capacity of 8. So, like, you can fit an officer plus a good size infantry section in there or multiple smaller teams if you wanted to, while also still having that frontal facing machine gun. So, it doesn't have to break the bank. It's cheaper than a regular machine gun team. It's almost as cheap as an inexperienced machine gun team. And it will still move up with you. It has a good chance of activating, especially if there's an officer inside, and it will carry a good sized payload for you to a place to present a real actual threat to the enemy. Now, the reason why the points cost is so low on these, of course, is because with the change that was made to vehicles, a damage value 6 plus vehicle only requires one successful roll of a 6, one wound against it in order to destroy it. There's no damage chart that takes place here, which means a machine gun team, what you're actually paying for is one, twice as many shots, right? Because vehicle shots are halved. But second, you're paying for 3 potential wounds instead of 1 potential wound, right? So in terms of the cost, I think the cost is fine. The theory here is just that, hey, if I want to provide cover fire, I can't guarantee that the cover fire that I'm going to be able to provide can happen from my deployment zone or from an easy place that was easy to run in with a team weapon. I want that cover fire to be coming with something that's a little more flexible, a little more nimble, and a little more agile. And so because of that, we take a gun truck. Now, the disadvantages of gun truck theory are exactly what you expect. First of all, you are actively endangering your transport, right? Like you are intentionally throwing it into a fight. And the intention is that it's fighting, right? Which is a quite dangerous place to be, right? Right here, you have an example of, a Polish thing. We'll come back to a personal story on why this still works out a little bit, but Polish infantry sections like this were not run very heavily in second edition. We might see them a little more in third edition. We'll see. But having a machine gun that could cover these guys is nice, but it also means that we've invested quite a bit in a squad. We've invested a bit in an officer that's going with that squad that you see down there at the bottom left. And now we're actively endangering another 40 points that we spent. Like there's a lot that's at risk, right? When you run something like this. This also does mean this is a more expensive transport than you could otherwise do because you're tacking on an extra 15 points for a machine gun, possibly more, depending on what kind of transport you're using, right? A Bren carrier is paying roughly 10 points for its light machine gun, is paying another 10 points for its pintle-mounted machine gun. You could possibly be even adding additional points if you choose to switch out the light machine guns forward-facing for, say, an AT rifle, right? All of these have their benefits. They're providing suppressive fire to the enemy. They're actually doing active danger to the enemy instead of just being a caddy that's moving up troops. But it does mean you're paying more points, right? Of course, we've already mentioned that you have shots with your machine gun, so you're not getting the full shots that you would from a machine gun team. That is definitely a disadvantage. It's something we're thinking about, okay? And also, all nations are created mostly equal as regards gun truck theory. It's not quite as lopsided as dropship, for example. But some are more equal than others, right? So every nation, because of commonly available transports, has access to an 8 to 12 man truck that has a machine gun on it, right? But there are some places that are going to have, for example, a VUDB Berlier. And so the French and the Belgians are going to have the ability to have a light machine gun providing cover, but it's fully buttoned up as a damage value 7 plus vehicle. So it is completely safe from small arms. You can't even pin it with small arms, right? That might be a better gun truck theory than a truck because that truck could be taken out by a single sniper. And that doesn't end particularly well, right? So again, I personally think, and this is where we'll go into the philosophy story, I don't think you're actually taking the gun truck because you think you're going to do a lot of wounds with it. I think, first of all, you're taking it for pin. So in that sense, the half shots are really not that bad because even if you took it inexperienced, 5+ or 6+ to hit with 3 shots on a full medium machine gun, you're probably, you may not get a pin every single turn, but you have a pretty good chance at it. And if you're standing still and you're just looking at that 5+ to hit, or if you took it regular and you moved and shot in a given turn, you're looking at fives now, you've got a pretty good chance of doing a pin every turn, which is not horrible. And then if you remove a guy, fantastic. If you roll bonkers out of the box, fantastic, right? So, I mean, I think on the whole, it is definitely a downside with this. It's not as effective as taking a team weapon, but I think it does come with certain benefits. And I went to a tournament, actually, the Operation Valediction tournament that you see the Maryland State Championship trophy here, over here and behind me, where I ended up winning that tournament. I was playing Poland as kind of a last hurrah for second edition because I knew they were going to rein back in close combat. There was like no way they weren't going to going into third. And so when we ended up playing in that tournament, I made a point to do something that had become available per the most recent errata, but hadn't been around for very long, which is I took 2 trucks regular with pintle mounted forward facing machine guns. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted suppressive supporting fire to protect my cavalry as they were going up. And I would keep an AT rifle team or a mortar team or something like that close by near that truck so that my opponent always had in the back of their mind that I could, for the sake of challenging an objective, run or advance that squad into the transport and then run or advance the transport up to the objective. And so now they had this psychological game where they're like, okay, well, the truck on its own is not that dangerous, all things considered. But it could present a danger, so I might need to neutralize it. But in the process of neutralizing it, I'm not attacking the enemy cavalry. And when you've got veteran Polish lancers running down your throat, and there's like 5 squads of them all coming at you, in addition to a mounted officer section, so you've got 6 very flexible, very mobile units on top of these 2, and then technically a civilian car as well that I often kept like near a marksman. There was just so many things that they knew they had to be shooting at. They weren't really able to capitalize and concentrate fire on any given thing without opening themselves up to danger elsewhere. And I think the real benefit of the gun truck is that it's supporting you. It's providing pins downrange, it's shooting for you. But there's also a psychological threat as long as you keep an infantry section of some kind close by, that it could become a caddy that moves something up and gets something on an objective. And that is also dangerous. So you're kind of splitting your opponent's mind in a lot of ways. They can't focus on the things they would like to focus on. And if they do focus on the gun truck, the benefit is you don't have to have a unit in it in order to make it an effective threat. So it's not like they're stacking pins on everybody inside because it could be completely empty until you really need it to operate, right? Maybe if you're taking one of those gun trucks that has multiple weapon systems on it, you're taking like a Bren carrier or certain builds of say an M3 fill in the blank, right? Whether it's the car or the half track, you can take extra machine guns on it. You can leave say like an officer in there if you really want to, but the benefit here is that especially for those one weapon system transports, you don't have to have anybody inside. You can just be sitting around and you're constantly threatening to put somebody inside. They have to act like you might put somebody inside. But in reality, you might just continue firing with all of those units long range, especially if they've got a nice long range weapon like an anti-tank rifle, or they're a sniper, or they have a mortar, right? Or something like that. You don't have to mount them up, but there's the constant fear you might. So they have to plan and work and strategize as if you are. And all of that could be very useful for opening up alleys for you. So in terms of transport choice, what are we looking at? First of all, in terms of transport capacity, honestly, that doesn't matter all that much. What matters is the weapon choice. So, Obviously, things like a Jeep or something like that, where when you take the weapon on it, it loses transport capacity. We aren't talking about any of those. Most commonly, you're going to be looking at something with a transport capacity between 5 and 8, could be up to 12 if you really want to. But in reality, there's no real reason, unless the unit you want to threaten to bring up has a capacity larger than a transport capacity of 8. There's no real reason to take a bigger truck. Just take a lighter truck with that transport capacity of 8 and slap a machine gun on it, right? Because the transport capacity is not what matters. Save yourself 4 points. Take something that has a lower transport capacity, but still gets you the weapon system that you want. Armored vehicles could be worth it because obviously they're going to last longer in combat for two reasons. One, because small arms can only pin them, they can't actually damage them, assuming that they're open topped. If they're completely closed, small arms can't do anything to them, right? At the same time, they are a lot more expensive, right? So you can buy two, I'm not kidding you, like two light trucks with pintle mounted machine guns, purchased inexperienced, for the same cost as one Bren carrier with a pintle mounted light machine gun, in addition to its light machine gun or an AT rifle on it, right? Like, so now you're getting two trucks with 3 shots instead of one armored transport with two weapons that might have 1 to 2 shots on it. Admittedly, one of them is a heavy weapon in the case of the AT rifle. But the point is, your shots are dramatically more, you're getting more order dice. There are a lot of things to consider, like how important is it for you? Can you improve the sustainability and the durability of your transport by including a good amount of cover? Right. Or just having more threats on the field so they look and they're just like 3 shots every turn from a machine gun on a truck is really not that important to me. I need to deal with other threats first. Right. Does it need to be mobile in rough terrain? In the example that we're using here, our evolving battlefield of transports, we've chosen for the German side, because we were alternating which side gets each transport. We've decided for this one that we're going to do a Maltier version of the Opel Blitz. So in this case, it's a half-track vehicle. It is not a wheeled vehicle. Is it necessary? Not necessarily. There are certain benefits. So, the obvious one being you can move through rough terrain with a half-track vehicle. So, if, for example, if the fields over there were considered to be rough ground, I honestly don't know why people tend to count it as rough ground. I have been in non-military grade wheeled vehicles that have been able to drive through fields of wheat, heck, through fields of corn without a dramatic difficulty. So I really don't know why it's considered rough ground. I think a lot of people are trying to count it, since they want to give it soft cover. And I think that is probably accurate because it is difficult to see the full silhouette of a person when they're moving through fields like that. I do feel like we could make it soft cover but open ground instead of basically treating it like a forest, because a forest and a field are not the same thing. But if you wanted to have the ability to be able to move through something that somebody said is rough ground, sometimes it's very nice to be able to get the angles that you want with the gun if you have the ability to move into rougher terrain. Okay. So you might consider doing that. Do you need to have double movement on roads? I think while a lot of the actual dropping transports, it definitely helps to do that. I'm not so sure you need it on a gun truck. It could be nice just for helping you to provide those cover fire lanes and to get a quick zippy one in if you need to just quickly, rush in and take out a flamethrower team that's hiding behind a building. But in reality, uh, like if you're keeping pace with infantry, it's not like infantry are typically moving at 24 inches, right? So because of that, since we want to be able to get, sure, advance actions, do you need the 24 inches? Maybe, maybe not, right? So suddenly here, things like a Bren carrier, Hanamag for supporting fire, they work out okay. I mean, they're doing just fine because you don't necessarily need to have a half-tracked or wheeled vehicle in order to get the job done. A fully tracked vehicle could be perfectly fine. And then finally, consideration for veterancy. You will commonly see these taken, if they're being taken for the purpose of shooting, you'll see them taken as regular, especially if you're taking the cheap trucks, because you're not paying that many more points for regular and you're more likely to activate. You don't get the -1 to hit penalty. There's just a lot of benefits from doing that. Now, at the same time, when we're considering all of these things, and we've talked about expense and we've talked about what you're paying for, there are ways to lean really heavy into the transport choice. And so a great example of this is something like the Stummel. Now, the Stummel, for those of you who are not aware, I'm in the process of building this right now. This is the first one that I've owned. It is not a transport at all. It's an armored vehicle, going in an armored platoon for Germany. And the way that this Stummel works is it's an SDKFZ 258 typically. I want to say that there's a 251 variant, which is the one that's here in the Wardler box. But in this case, it's a Hanomag, right? You know, it's a damage value 7 plus half track chassis, but they stuck a light howitzer on the front. And then you have the ability, if you want, to add an additional pintle mounted machine gun. Now, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Since it's still an armored vehicle, I think it can fire both of those weapon systems without a single person in it. And that gives you a 4-shot machine gun because Hitler's Buzzsaw, Germany special rule, which is awesome, and a howitzer. So you have another really good anti-infantry, anti-personnel tool, but also a way to do D2 pins relatively easily to vehicles, which is nice. And for an extra 8 points, you can give it a transport capacity of 8, which means, again, you can use this as just purely a fighting vehicle. You don't have to get anything more. It's 85 points regular, 100 points if you slap on the machine gun, and then an extra 8 points if you want to give it the transport capacity. You could just run this as an armored fighting vehicle if you wanted to and just save yourself an extra 8 points. But for 8 points, you could make it so that you can keep an infantry section relatively nearby. Call it, one with a couple of light machine guns in it. They're providing fire down range, but at any point, you could jump it into that self-propelled gun. And self-propelled gun starts going crazy forward. And as it's moving in on the enemy, suddenly you're contesting an objective with infantry, right? That are perfectly safe from small arms fire inside of an armored transport. And then armored transport is unleashing howitzer shells at you, right? Like there's a lot of options here. Now, again, that is the cost of 2 regular non-upgraded Bren carriers. And it's the cost of almost 3 machine gun light trucks, right? So, from a firepower perspective, there's probably better ways to do it. Obviously, from an order dice perspective, there's probably better ways to do it. But from a strategic level, that presents a very interesting and difficult challenge for your opponent. You can lean heavy into this if you want to, okay? With a whole lot of weapon systems that are highly effective on armored chassis. The question is just, what do you actually need, right? What do you need in your transport choice? So when it comes to deployment, not a lot of crazy stuff that's going on here. Obviously, you're going to want to deploy in cover because, again, we want to keep this thing safe and alive as long as we can. So using the example on the right-hand side, looking at the Maltier, you could deploy it in the rough terrain, and maybe you get a soft cover bonus from the fields. I would give it a soft cover bonus from the fields. But in this case, the decision was to deploy it behind where that sandbag was, behind the ruin. All of what the enemy was able to shoot at, they were going to be invoking cover of some kind, but it was mostly going to be heavy cover, if not completely and totally obscuring it from sight at all, right? So we're suddenly safe from the M3 Lee. I don't think that Jeep is going to try to finagle a way to get the flamethrower over to it. Even if it does, you've got that double light machine guns 5-man section that's right next to it. So if a flamethrower tries to deal with this thing, it's going to get punished by the light machine gun shortly afterwards, and that's going to be removed. While at the same time, it has a firing lane and a path for advancement, right? In this case, since it's a Maltier, it only gets 9 inches of move, but just eyeballing it, you can probably get right behind that sandbag emplacement within 9 inches, and suddenly you've still got your heavy cover. Things are firing at you. A lot more angles are giving you heavy cover, and you're still able to suppress the machine gun team that's ahead of you in the opposing heavy covered, sandbag emplacement. You can suppress the transport. You have a lot of options, right, for what you can do, and it can do that as early as turn 1 because we have a good firing lane that we've prepared here. Second, you want to plan out multiple locations, okay? You want to deploy this mid to late, though. The truth is, because you're not technically going to, because you don't have anybody in it, you don't have to worry as much about, oh, no, they're going to stack a bunch of pins on me, right? You can deploy this a little bit earlier. Make sure you've got a good firing lane, and then you can plan the rest of your troops around it, right? And all that you're doing is you're signaling, again, it's the psychological warfare, right? You're signaling, this is a transport. Currently, it's empty. But you don't know what else I'm going to deploy next to it. So as long as you still have some infantry sections in hand, That's actually advantageous, right? Because now your opponent's thinking things through. There's a whole lot of mind games going. Okay, it's got a transport. It's empty, but he hasn't placed this 5-man light machine gun team, doubled up light machine gun team yet. He hasn't deployed this, 6-man veteran submachine gun squad yet. He hasn't deployed his company commander yet, right? All of this stuff. They now got to think, oh no, what if he puts it in or around or with the transport, right? Like, there's just a lot of questions that they're now asking, and you get the benefit of it from a deployment perspective by deploying it slightly earlier than a lot of the other transports that we've talked about so far. You want to place this after you've seen some of the enemy infantry and artillery targets. You can also place it after they've placed some vehicles if you know that they're running open-topped vehicles, right? So like, if you've seen that they've placed an M3 White Scout car or a Hanomag, if you've seen that they've placed an open-top self-propelled gun, because they wanted to save some points on an SPG, and so they took the open-topped chassis, typically damage value 7 plus or 8 plus, over and against a fully buttoned up Stug 3, for example, right? Or Stu 42, right? The result is you want to have good shots that you can take that are going to be advantageous for you already lined up. Okay. Don't place this in an area that's completely empty. Do not drop this as your first drop. Okay. In terms of placing it in reserves, honestly, I wouldn't do that. The simple reason is that you want to be firing as quickly as you can. There's really not a lot of reason to go into reserves, and there's not a lot of really good counter deployment you can do with gun truck because you're only getting probably circa 3 shots off of this thing, right? 3 to 4 shots depending on your nation. So I would say deploy it as early as you can, bring it in on first wave, or have it already starting on the table at the end of turn 0. Don't leave it in reserve. The one exception to this is you can outflank these. If you do outflank a gun truck, one, I would highly recommend including an officer in it, possibly another unit if you really want to, but that doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you want an officer in there to make sure you can come in, and you're really using the gun truck to come in swift and quickly in order to take out enemy teams that they thought were safe because they were far back, right? Somebody has a light mortar team that's hiding behind a stone wall. If you can outflank a gun truck behind that stone wall, you can probably wipe the light mortar team in a single turn, right? Even if they're not particularly close to the board edge and you're not at point blank range, you have a non-zero chance of doing a pretty good chance of doing a wound, and then that one wound is going to then trigger a morale test. And a lot of people aren't investing in really high morale for their light mortar teams, okay? The other reason why I would highly recommend including an officer or at least an extra unit in it is because if you're not taking an armored transport, and even if you are, per the rules for how transports work when there's no one in them, you would either be requiring yourself to have units close by that are closer to you than the enemy unit that, for example, you might have shot at and not removed. If they are closer than your men are, if you have a hostile unit closer than your friendly units, then armored transport on a 3 down on a d6 roll, you run away. You lose the gun truck after a single shot, which is not great. On a soft skin, you would just lose the transport, right? There's no chance to save it. So keep a unit inside just so that you keep the gun truck on the table, right? And then you can jump them out later if you really want to. It's not, as long as you keep them close by. Just remember that, you got to keep that unit alive. Otherwise, you're also effectively throwing away the transport, right? So outflanking can be done, is a little more tricky, has a lot of other things to add on. It is more stressful, and you aren't getting those extra 2 turns of shooting in. So just make sure if you're going to do it that there's a good reason for doing it, and you're not just outflanking for no good reason, because you are losing firepower. The question is, are you removing enough cover to make it worth it? And then comes the rush. So here's the funny thing. You're probably going to call an advance action or a fire action every time. You don't actually need to rush all that much. You want to make sure that you have a lane for it, right? But the real point behind this is that you're providing effective suppression to keep your infantry and other assets safe, right? So then comes the question of how far can you move up without leaving people behind? And of course, because of the fact that empty transports can be removed, as we just talked about, this becomes even more of an issue, right? You really don't want to leave your men behind because it could literally remove your vehicle. So keep that in mind. In terms of officer snap twos, honestly, like you can snap to it, in which case, snap to the transport, and, if there's a transported unit, get them out, allow them to be able to jump out where they have the benefit of the suppression coming in. But to be honest, you don't have to mount up the infantry, right? You can reduce the pin chance if you just don't mount them up, right? If you mount them up later when you actually need them to be in it, but otherwise just have them moving alongside the transport. Okay. And then asking the question of cover, right? On the one hand, you need to have an effective firing lane, but how can you get the firing lane that you need while at the same time providing ample cover for the rest of your men, right? So in the case to the right hand side, for example, the Maltier can move up pretty much right behind that heavy cover if it wants to. Leave yourself a couple of inches. That way you can pivot and move around it if you need to in the future. But the critical thing is that it will then create a nice little barrier and protection from the left-hand side for the infantry should the infantry decide to move up and attack, right? You're giving yourself a little bit of extra options there. So then in terms of tactics, we would say this is, for evacuating or dropping the transports. Really, this is more of escorting. It's really more of what we're doing, right? So first of all, focus on your facing. You need to be able to pivot to your firing lane at the end of your move, right? Make sure that you remember that since it's going to be, 45 degrees one way and 45 degrees the other way in terms of what your firing arc is, just keep in mind that you really are, actually, let's cut that part. So just remember that because your forward arc, it's going out at an angle, it isn't necessarily straight on. You can angle yourself a little bit in order to maybe, extend the amount of potential cover that you're doing or take advantage of other cover by sticking out just barely beyond a building, but catching the things you want to be able to shoot at over using that diagonal angle. So keep that in mind. In terms of footprint, again, you need to be able to keep everybody more than 1 inch apart. But also, and more importantly here, your firing lanes have to be an inch or more away from friendly units. With other transports, you don't necessarily have a gun on it. And so because of that, you don't have to worry as much about what the final angles are. But in order to make sure that you're safe, wherever you're planning on dropping units or supporting units that are coming up alongside you, you have to keep the lanes clear. Okay? Do you need to have cover? Does the squad need to have cover? Are you the cover? All of these are important questions. The critical thing is that because you need to have an effective firing lane, you generally are going to have a smaller profile from a cover perspective for the units that you're escorting. Okay? Because you can't turn your body completely sideways. You can't do it as much at an angle. We're going to talk about this more in the next one when we talk about cover transports. Okay? But the critical thing here is are you the thing that actually needs supporting and cover, or is somebody else more important than you? Okay. And then finally, we have our objectives, right? So can you clear units that are on those objectives that other units, like say a big squad with submachine guns, maybe they can't do because they won't be able to reach as far? Or they shouldn't do because it's a 2-man AT rifle team and your 12 shots from your 6 submachine guns shouldn't be doing that, right? They should be working on a 5-man team with a light machine gun instead of a small 2-man team. 2-man team is a great option for a gun truck because you probably get a hit, which will mean a pin, and you got a decent chance then of doing a wound. And even if they've got cover after that, all it takes is sneaking through one wound, right? You sneak one wound in, that team could be leaving. So, things to consider. And then finally, tactics for retreating your transport. First of all, should you be standing and fighting? And the answer to that is basically every time, right? You should be retreating this basically never, because the whole point of the gun truck is to be a fighting vehicle, right? And to give an example of this borrows from what I was doing at Operation Valediction in September of 2024 for the Maryland State Championship. You run a truck with a machine gun. The whole point is that you shouldn't be retreating. The whole point is you're running forward, you're attacking, and then you can put another unit behind it that can advance at basically the same rate that it can, right? And as it's moving forward and suppressing by providing pins down range, you're still giving yourself the option to be able to use that unit. So now you've got your 6-man veteran Polish cavalry section that's running behind it. It's getting cover from the truck as it's going forward. And then when you're ready to, you issue a run order to these cavalry and they're running out. And even if somebody reactive fires against the charge, because they're shooting from where it starts on an ambush and you get the choice as to whether or not you assault an ambushing unit or not, then they're still getting a cover penalty to the firing, right? So that's advantageous. And furthermore, even if they do have a unit on ambush, because again you get a choice of which unit you assault, you can fire with the truck at the unit that's on ambush to at least apply a pin, and now suddenly they're getting a -1 to hit, right? Which in second edition, by the way, was the same as getting a soft cover penalty, right? So because of that, it's like, well, if you shoot at me on ambush, it's really the same, sans the point blank range. Is basically the same as what you would have gotten had you just been reactive firing against me, right? So, the thing to think about is yes, like you're trying to fight. You might even lose the transport. That's fine. It's cheap, right? That's the whole point behind running these. Your job is to shoot, shoot, shoot every single turn. That's either going to be an advance order, it's going to be a fire order, possibly an ambush order, depending on what the situation's like and whether you think an opponent's likely to come out from their hiding place because maybe they have to contest an objective. So since you've got them near a squad that's on an objective, you're just going to put it in an ambush and you're just going to wait for the squad that's in front of you to come out from where the cover is. The one exception where you might not be fighting and you might need to retreat is if you're playing a kill point scenario like Seek and Destroy or something like that, and you are afraid you're going to lose the order dice. And you're running pretty close on order dice and you're trying to do some order dice conservation, at which point you might retreat the truck because you're like, the 3 shots from this thing are not actually all that likely to do enough wounds to actually remove an order dice. So if they could pretty easily remove me, and this guy is not going to be meaningfully contributing to us removing one of them, we're potentially throwing the game by doing that. So we're going to retreat the truck in order to protect and conserve the order dice. That is pretty much the only reason why you should be doing that. Okay. You will see lateral retreats or supports where you're moving away with the truck toward another place on the battlefield. This is mostly common when an objective has been cleared. So, if you were moving up and you were helping to clear out some of those small support teams and your other men have moved up and the submachine gun guys have got it now, it's going to be just them against, say, like, one medium mortar or something like that. You can move the gun truck, right? Obviously, keep in mind, you got to end closer to your allies than you do your enemies at the end of a turn. But you can, at this point, their turn is done. You can maneuver them and get them away. You could leave them behind for an extra turn. Maybe provide some long range fire support to another place. So that way, when the submachine guns clear the place out and you've moved up another squad to be able to take it, you can retransport them over. I'll be honest, maybe it's helpful, maybe it isn't. I don't know. It all depends. It all depends. Could be useful, may not be all that useful. In terms of second load, you're not typically going to have a second load because, again, you're playing the psychological warfare game for actually loading people up in the first place, and so you really don't need to have redundancy in that regard. So there really aren't going to be very many options for you to be able to just go back, pick up some more guys, and then move again, especially because you're probably giving up shots on at least one of those turns. And the whole point of paying the extra 15 points on a light truck was to take the shots. That's the whole point. So would not personally recommend falling back all the way to your lines to grab another unit and go. Instead, take the opportunity to just move to another place and be a mobile machine gun team. Now, is this the smartest way to use transports? I think it's a fine way to use transports. Mostly, it's going to appeal to people whose philosophy regarding units is that everybody should be contributing something, and they should be contributing something as long as they're on the table. And the common problem with the cheap transports that we've been seeing throughout this series so far is that once they've dropped off the guys, effectively they don't really matter, right? There may be a form of cover in case you need the cover. They might be a way of quickly falling back other guys. They're cheap order dice. All of those are perfectly valid reasons, but they aren't actually contributing to removing any of the enemy. They aren't contributing to pinning any of the enemy in those kinds of situations. And what the gun truck leans into is, yeah, we're giving you the option to be able to move guys up. We're giving the option to be able to better contest objectives, to have deep strike capability. But what we're actually doing is we're also being a relatively cheap machine gun, or we're being a relatively cheap heavy weapon. And we're going to provide you with the opportunity to be suppressing and shooting while also doing double duty as a transport. And that is really nice to have sometimes because you don't really actually ever know when you need 1 or 2 more pins on a unit in order to do the job. And the beauty about the super cheap light truck transport, again, at 38 points, is that you run these super, super cheap, right? You can run a ton of them in your army. You could run 4 Polish infantry cavalry sections, just veteran cavalry sections. And per the rules for transports, you can take 4 gun trucks technically for those units. They don't necessarily have to be able to fit or get into the transport in order to do so. So you could run 4 of them to screen for each of these, right? And if they get blown up, darn it, now I have heavy cover in front of my guys instead of soft cover, right? And those extra points that you paid, the extra 150 points that you paid, is designed to make it so that way the squads that are behind them, the squads that are working around them, the armored vehicles that are working around them, they are more likely to get where they need to go because your opponent was throwing firepower at the trucks instead of throwing it at something more important. I think you can go overload on this. I would not recommend that half of the units in your army be gun trucks. I think they're going to get removed way too quickly to be that effective. But having the option for them and being able to use them effectively to pin and suppress the enemy in preparation for a critical move and maneuver can be game changing. Let us know what you think down below, and we will see you next time.